Welcome back to the Accel Advantage Podcast, where we talk through decisions our business owners face every day around risk, money, and growth. I am your host, Corey Riekers, and today we are joined by Scott Dersher, one of our incredible financial advisors inside of our Accel Wealth Management division here at the Accel Group. Scott, welcome to our podcast.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Corey.
So I know we're going to talk about estate and succession planning today, and maybe more specifically about trust work. But before we dive into all that, would you mind giving the audience a little bit more about your background and how you got into helping people with their financial planning?
So, Corey, I've been a financial planning and investment advisor for almost 30 years now. I started way back in the late 90s. When I started the planning process, I was working with a couple guys in Cedar Falls, and we were working with farmers and other small business owners to help them get through probate and make sure that the transition to their family or to the next generation was as cost effective as possible.
And you grew up on a farm, right, Scott?
Yes, that's correct. I grew up on a small family farm up in Northeast Iowa.
You and I have talked about this in the past, but I know maybe your grandparents, you kind of watched that transition too. I've got a story too on that. I think here in Iowa is kind of funny because either you grew up on a farm or you knew somebody that grew up on a farm, and so there's this correlation with estate planning and succession planning. Specifically here in Iowa, I think it's a little bit more well-known, I guess, than most places. And everyone's got a story to tell when it comes to estate planning. Can you kind of share a little bit about your family a little bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. Back in the 80s and 90s, the federal estate exemption was $600,000. And, back when farm ground was $300-$400 an acre, you really didn't have too bad of an estate problem.
Yeah.
When somebody died and we had to transfer those assets to the next generation or to the other family members through probate and everything. But as prices have gone up, the farm ground price has actually increased so much more than the exemption for the federal estate taxes, and that affected my family. When my grandfather passed away, when those acres had to go then to my dad and his brother, and just watching my dad and my mom and my uncle go through all of that, it really put this whole trust, will, what we're going to talk about, financial planning and transfer into light.
Yeah, I think we have very similar stories. My grandfather was the last to die with my grandmother. He died in 96, and I watched my dad go through 4 years of trying to figure out how he was going to continue farming. Again, the exemption, like you said, was $600,000. Having to buy out his siblings to be able to farm by himself, and then to pay the estate taxes. The farm was reduced significantly. And so I can relate to that story. Dad stopped farming in the year 2000 and just rents the ground out today. And so obviously I can just tell, you have a passion for helping people, maybe navigate that process, and maybe educate them a little bit on how you can maybe prevent some of that, some of those things from happening. And so I think that's what we want to get into today. Can we talk about maybe who is directly impacted from estate planning and who maybe should consider putting together a plan?
Sure. Estate planning in its broad sense covers a lot of things, but when we're talking about succession planning, we're talking about small business owners that have like a family business or want somebody in particular, to take over, whether it be a small business farm or even a small, retail shop, or it's anybody that basically wants to make sure that the next generation or whoever they have pegged for their succession plan can retain that business in the most cost-effective way.
So really, it's for anybody and everybody.
Exactly. It's for anybody.
So let's get into some actual strategy. So I guess we can start with maybe the most basic, maybe a will, for example.
Sure. Yeah, wills have been obviously around for a long time. Everybody understands what a will is, and basically that's the probate process. And, everybody talks about probate. And In its simplest form, probate is just the ability to have somebody sign transfer paperwork when you pass away. Okay. When you're alive today and you sell your house, you just sign the deed and away you go. But at your death, then that's when your will comes into play because you can't sign those types of papers. You have to have an executor appointed by the court system. The will itself is going to be your roadmap on who gets what, when, where, and how. But within that will, you name an executor who's going to actually step in and be able to sign once they're appointed by the court system to distribute those assets. The will also could name, guardians for minor children if you have them, things of that nature. But with a will, everything comes into play after you die. And because you're reliant on the court system, sometimes that can take quite a bit of time to exercise and finish the will. So that has potential problems with, control. If you're a small business owner, who's going to sign payroll checks, all of that stuff could come into play with a will that is not, that doesn't get executed in a timely manner. Also, with a will, you actually have the probate process, which um, can have its costs. The Iowa Bar Association allows the attorney and the executor to take up to 2% fees for settling an estate. So you have to be careful when you're dealing with successful business or a large farm. The cost of probate from a valuation standpoint can be pretty expensive.
I have heard that probate can be quite timely and expensive, and quite frankly, could be troublesome, especially if those assets are frozen for a period of time, and if you do have a business, that could be troublesome. Is there another maybe strategy? I know we've talked about trusts in the past. Do you want to maybe hit on revocable trusts and how that strategy might be a little bit better for someone who
Sure.
might be in the situation you just talked about?
Yeah, and a lot of times a revocable trust is a better alternative from a will. Um, a revocable trust basically is just a contract between you and yourself. Okay, it's an actual agreement where it is built for not only at your death but during your lifetime. And what you're going to do is create the trust that is still a roadmap on who gets what, when, and where. But because it's an agreement through a trust document, we do not have to have the probate process. So there's no court involvement. You're still going to name a successor trustee who is going to work very similar to what um, an executor would be. So it works similar to a will, but it's a lot faster because we're not relying on the court.
Mhm.
One of the other advantages of a revocable trust is that it's private. If you wanted to, you could go down to the county courthouse and read probate files all day long, on who died, what their estate looked like, who got what your values were. Well, with a revocable trust, none of that is recorded, so all of your business affairs are kept private. And that is very important to some people. Because we're not dealing with the court system and going through probate, generally estates are settled faster through a revocable trust because of that no probate process.
But let's dive into some of our business owners. Can we maybe talk a little bit about what that business continuity planning would look like? Obviously, if they use a trust, what's the next step for them?
Sure. So, from a continuity standpoint, because you've named a successor trustee in your trust, that person then can just step in and take over for you on basically day one. You're already mentioned, or that person is already mentioned in the trust. So they can step in and start basically signing all payroll checks or doing all the business that you were doing, while you were alive.
I have heard, not really horror stories, but stories here and there when working with a family business or a small business where things can get potentially convoluted, maybe at the time of execution, if there isn't really clear authority on who's in charge of what. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Make sure that doesn't happen for the folks that are maybe listening on this
Oh, yeah.
particular podcast. Yeah.
Estate planning always, runs into a lot of things when you're dealing with
Yeah.
family. As fair is not equal and equal is not always fair. But when you do a very good estate plan, you want to specifically clarify who's doing all aspects of the business. Who's gonna do the day-to-day operation, who's going to take care of payroll or write checks, who's going to make operation decisions. You can specifically state all of that stuff in your trust, and it kicks in, at the time of your death. So that in itself will help avoid family disputes, partner confusions, and help settle the estate and keep the business running like it should be without any slag time. So
Is there any other potential pitfalls or areas of planning we haven't maybe talked through yet? Anything else our listeners should be aware of?
yeah, well, the other thing then, and this may be the most important thing for a lot of people potentially, the will doesn't come into play until the person dies. Okay. So obviously at death, everything's going to happen. But in the case of an owner becoming incapacitated, then the trust is still there and the successor trustee can step in knowing that one or two health things have triggered, the succession and that person to step in. So we don't have to go back to the court to get an appointed conservator. There isn't any business interruptions. And, the people that you have or the trusted people that you have in your trust are going to step in and take over for you if something were to happen to you when you're still alive and you can't physically run the business.
That where like maybe disability insurance would come into play
Yeah.
in correlation with that?
Yep. A lot of insurances can be, help cover some of that cost and everything. But this is more of the legal standing that says, yep, these
Yeah.
guys can step in at this point, take care of, the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I will say this, I've worked with a lot of business owners over the years, and this is probably the last thing they want to talk about, but probably one of the most important things they'll ever do. And the weight that's lifted off their shoulders once they have a good plan in place, knowing that the people are going to be taken care of, knowing they have exactly who's going to be running that business. I know once it's done, I'm sure you've got some stories on that where once you finish the plan, how great everybody feels after it's done. So
Oh, for sure. It's planning is easy to put off, especially when it's something that you don't want to die. So you don't want to, put that into play or think about it, until the time comes when it's too late. But we always think we're invincible and it's never going to happen, never going to happen. And it is a lot of work. It takes a lot to get your estate set up right because you own, whether it's an LLC or a farm owned ground by yourself, you've got to retitle, those assets into the trust. And that takes a little bit of work. But at the same point, it's just like anything, that work will be rewarded when the time comes.
Scott, this has been awesome. My hope here is that this will resonate and that we'll have some people take action. Unfortunately, good intentions in estate or business planning, succession planning means very little
Right.
unless there's a plan that's in place.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you can have a handshake and say, yep, this is what I want. But until it's on paper and everything and signed and executed, that's all it is good intentions. So.
yeah. All right. Well, hey, thank you for your time today. And Scott, what you do for your clients, I know they truly appreciate your counsel and the impact that you've had on so many people. So we certainly appreciate that. So
Right. Thanks for the opportunity.
yeah, no, pleasure's mine. I do want to thank the audience today for listening. And if you found today's episode helpful, please share it. You can learn more about the Accel Group at acceladvantage.com or accelwealthmanagement.com. You can also check us out on social media, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. If you like today's episode, we'd love to hear from you. Please don't be afraid to leave us a review. And finally, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. Remember, at the Accel Group, we've spent nearly 100 years helping business owners protect what matters most. Thanks again for spending some time with us today, and we'll see you next time on the Accel Advantage. Thanks, everybody.
Diversification does not guarantee a profit or product against a loss in a declining market. It is a method used to help manage investment risk, not associated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration, Medicare, or any other government agency.